I was pacing around my office, half distracted by the hum of my computer, when the thought hit me like a freight train. I was good at my job. I mean really good. And that was supposed to count for something. I'd spent 5 years at Verticore Designs, grinding my way up through the ranks, putting in the late hours, taking on the toughest projects. And now here I was, about to watch someone else get the promotion I had earned. My name's Carla Medina. I'm 32, and I've spent most of my adult life working as a structural engineer in a city where the skyline constantly changes, and where every new building was a chance for me to prove myself. My journey had started years ago, fresh out of grad school at Purdue, full of that eager, naive hunger. I wanted to rise in the industry, to be respected for what I could do. And so, I worked harder than anyone I knew. I remember the first time I met Elaine Granger, my mentor. She was the one who showed me that it wasn't just about being technically skilled. It was about leadership, about owning the room, about being so good that people couldn't ignore you. I learned a lot from her, even if I hated the way she made me feel, sometimes, like I was always falling just short of the mark. But then again, that was part of the deal. She was tough and I needed that. I kept my head down for years, racking up results. I designed the framework for 2 of Verticore's flagship skyscrapers, and managed teams that delivered some of the fastest timelines on record. My colleagues noticed. The executives noticed. They saw my dedication, and the sweat I poured into every project. But then there was Zach Ellison. Zach had been hired just a couple of years ago, and from the moment he stepped into the office, I could tell he was different. He had this natural charm, this aura that made people gravitate toward him. Everyone liked him, especially the higher-ups. He could talk his way through a conversation like a pro, weaving his way through meetings with clients and contractors, effortlessly making them feel heard, while I was in the back corner, furiously working on spreadsheets and blueprints. Sure, Zach could talk the talk, but when it came to the actual work, it was always me. He'd hand off his projects to me, or worse, take credit for the parts of designs I'd worked on late into the night. And somehow no one ever noticed. I'm not going to lie, I was getting tired of it. I was burning out. I had spent countless nights reworking his designs, covering for him when he didn't pull his weight, and still, when it came time for promotions, the rumors were always pointing to him. Zach was the one they liked. Zach was the one they thought would be the next lead project engineer. I had assumed the promotion was mine. I'd worked my tail off for it, after all. Everyone in the office seemed to think so, too. Elaine even told me repeatedly, "You've earned it, Carla. You just keep doing what you're doing, and they'll see." And for the most part, I believed her. But in the back of my mind, something was starting to gnaw at me. I had earned it. But somehow, I wasn't so sure anymore that being the best at what you do was enough. That was the moment when it all clicked into place. The day I found out that Zach was getting the promotion instead of me. It was the day of the big staff briefing. Everyone was gathered, murmuring to themselves as the CEO, Darren Holt, stood at the front, looking over a few papers. I sat there, barely able to keep my hands from trembling as I waited for the announcement. I'd already mentally prepared my acceptance speech. I had already imagined myself standing in front of the team, accepting the promotion, and finally taking that next step. Then Darren cleared his throat. "I'd like to announce our new lead project engineer," he said, looking out at the room. He paused a bit too long, and I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. "Please, don't do this to me," I thought, holding my breath. "Zach Ellison," Darren said. I froze. My stomach dropped so fast that I thought I might collapse on the spot. The words didn't make sense at first. But then Zach stood up, grinning like he had just won a prize. He made his way to the front and thanked everyone in his usual charismatic way, before turning to me. "I couldn't have done it without you, Carla," he said, his voice booming across the room. "She's the one who helped me out when I needed it most." Everyone clapped. I felt my face flush with the heat of humiliation as I forced a smile. It took every ounce of willpower to not lose my composure in front of the room. And as Zach soaked in the praise, I realized something that hit me harder than anything else. He wasn't just getting the promotion. He was taking credit for my work. Every late night I had spent designing, all the calculations I had made, were now his. I had been the one putting in the hours. But somehow Zach's charisma had won the day. Elaine, sitting next to me, looked furious. Her eyes burned with disbelief as she stared at Zach. But when she turned to me, she didn't say a word. She didn't need to. I could see it in her eyes. The same thing I was feeling. Betrayal. In that moment, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let this happen again. Zach might have won the promotion, but I was going to find a way to make sure my work, my real contributions, weren't just swept under the rug. I wasn't going to let him take the credit for everything I had done. That was just the beginning. The days following the promotion were a blur. I buried myself in work to avoid thinking about the unfairness of it all. I had to keep my head down, focus on my projects, and try not to dwell on the constant weight of Zach's smug smile. It was all I could do to avoid snapping at him every time he breezed through my office, pretending like everything was fine. And it wasn't fine. Not even close. It felt like everything was shifting under my feet. Suddenly, the projects that had been handed to me, the ones I had crushed, were being pushed aside for Zach. He was now the lead, after all. And as far as everyone was concerned, he was the one who should be leading the teams. But here's the thing. Zach wasn't a real leader. He had zero technical skills. The guy couldn't even read a blueprint without asking for help. The amount of times I had to fix his design mistakes, only for him to present them as his own, was honestly ridiculous. It's not like I minded helping, or at least I did at first. That was the deal, right? I was supposed to be the quiet, competent engineer in the background, supporting the star. But it wasn't just support anymore. Zach had started to delegate his responsibilities to me entirely. I'd fixed the structural flaws in his designs, put together the presentations for our meetings, and crunched the numbers for him. And then he'd stand in front of the clients with that charming smile, and take all the credit. He would drop little comments during meetings that made my blood boil. "Oh, I couldn't have pulled this off without Carla's help," he'd say, his voice dripping with false modesty. "She's really the one with the brains behind the designs, you know." And the worst part? No one ever questioned it. Everyone just nodded along, as if that was the way it had always been. I was his backup, his assistant, despite doing all the work. I kept reminding myself of something Elaine had said to me months ago, before all of this happened. "The board knows who does the heavy lifting, Carla. You just have to trust that the right people are watching." But it wasn't just the board anymore. It was the entire company. Everyone was under Zach's spell. He was constantly socializing with the executives, talking to the right people, wearing the right clothes, saying the right things. Every time he walked into a room, the air seemed to shift with him. He was charming. He knew how to make people laugh, make them feel like they mattered. I couldn't compete with that. Not in the same way, anyway. There were days when I'd walk past the main conference room, and Zach would be there, laughing and talking with Darren Holt, the CEO. The man who, just a few months ago, had congratulated me on my work and praised my dedication. Now he was laughing at one of Zach's jokes. I'd stand there, just out of sight, and watch them for a second. I felt like a stranger in my own office. How had we gotten here? How had I gone from the obvious choice for lead engineer to this invisible background figure? It wasn't until one of those long days, sitting in a meeting where Zach presented my designs with his usual flair, that I had enough. The project we were discussing was something I had spent weeks on, late nights and early mornings working to perfect. I had thought it was the key to proving myself, to finally showing everyone that I was capable of being the lead, even if Zach was the one in the spotlight. But Zach had taken my plans and reworked them in his own image, with no real understanding of the intricacies behind them. And when he presented them to the clients, he spoke with the kind of confidence that made it seem like he had done all the work. I couldn't sit back any longer. After the meeting, I stopped by Elaine's office, knowing that if there was anyone who might understand, it would be her. She didn't look surprised to see me. "You need to stop playing nice," she said, without looking up from the stack of papers in front of her. "I know," I muttered. "But what am I supposed to do, Elaine? I'm doing the work. I'm the one making sure everything runs smoothly, and he's getting the glory. It's like I don't even exist. No one sees what I'm doing. No one sees me." Elaine set down her pen and looked at me with something that almost resembled pity in her eyes. "You're letting him take it. You're letting him use you." I felt the sharp sting of the truth, but I wasn't ready to hear it yet. What else am I supposed to do? I can't just stop. I can't quit. I need this job. You think this is the only place you can do what you're doing? She said, her voice low and serious. You've built yourself up, Carla. You've proven your worth. Don't let him or anyone else take that from you. I didn't answer. My head was spinning. I had worked my entire life to get here, and now I was standing in front of the woman who had always been my guide, and I wasn't sure where I stood anymore. Was I just going to keep working for someone else's gain? Was I really going to let Zach walk all over me? Elaine leaned back in her chair and sighed. If you're not going to stand up for yourself, no one else will, Carla. I felt the heat rise in my chest. She was right. I had to do something. The next day, I pulled up the design proposal for the upcoming city project. The one Zach had presented the day before. I stared at it for a long while, thinking about everything I had given, everything I had built, only to watch someone else take the credit. That was the moment I made up my mind. I was done playing by the rules. I was done being overlooked. And I was done letting Zach take the credit for what was rightfully mine. So I started collecting evidence, documentation, every email he'd sent me asking for help, every time I'd covered for him, every mistake he'd made that I had fixed. I wasn't going to let him win this time. It was time to take back control. The day I found out was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my career. It was the morning of the big staff briefing, the one where they were supposed to announce the new lead project engineer. I had been preparing for it for weeks, running over every detail of the upcoming city project. I had put in countless hours refining designs, collaborating with contractors, and making sure everything was perfect. It was supposed to be my moment. I had earned it. I had always assumed that the next logical step was mine. It wasn't a question in my mind. Everyone knew it. The clients knew it. The executives knew it. I had done the work. The long hours. The blood, sweat, and tears. As I sat in the conference room, my fingers drummed nervously against the table, my thoughts racing. I was wearing my favorite blazer, the one I always put on when I knew something important was going to happen. I had been on edge all morning, barely able to focus. The anticipation was killing me. But at the same time, there was a small, almost imperceptible feeling of certainty inside me. The kind of quiet confidence that only comes when you know you've done everything right. The room was filled with the usual chatter of colleagues exchanging pleasantries. Everyone was buzzing about the announcement. Darren Holt, the CEO of Verticore, stood at the front of the room, papers in hand. He scanned the crowd with a smile, like he was about to announce something monumental. A hush fell over the room as he cleared his throat. I sat up straighter, my pulse quickening. This was it. Good morning, everyone, Darren began, his voice booming across the room. We're gathered here today to make an exciting announcement. As you all know, we've been looking for a new lead project engineer, and I have to say, we've been impressed by the level of talent on this team. I felt a rush of pride. I had worked my ass off to get here. As you can imagine, it was a tough decision. But after careful consideration, we've chosen someone who has consistently gone above and beyond in their work, who's shown incredible leadership potential and a dedication to this company that's unmatched. I let out a breath, trying to keep my excitement in check. This was happening. It was my time. And that person, Darren continued, his voice dropping a little, is Zach Ellison. My heart stopped. For a split second, everything went silent in my ears. I couldn't even hear the murmurs of disbelief around me. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Zach. Zach. I turned to look at him. He was sitting across from me, already standing up, his face alight with that charming grin of his. He was smiling, laughing, practically glowing. And then, as if it was the most casual thing in the world, he turned to face the room. I want to thank Carla for all her help with this project. I couldn't have done it without her, he said, his voice dripping with insincerity as he shot me a knowing glance. The room erupted in applause. I was frozen, completely still. The kind of stillness that takes over when the floor drops out from beneath you. I wasn't sure what was worse. The fact that I was hearing his name, or the fact that he was thanking me in front of the entire company for the work I had done. The work he had taken credit for. The applause rang in my ears like a distorted echo. People clapped, people smiled, but I felt like I was suffocating in the middle of it all. I could feel the burn in my chest, the hot sting of humiliation creeping up my neck and into my face. My hands were shaking, but I kept them still. I had worked too hard to break down now. I couldn't let anyone see how badly this hurt. Zach stood there, basking in the adulation of the room, and I felt a dark, creeping sense of anger growing inside me. How was this happening? How was I sitting here, having put in more hours, more effort, more heart into this project than anyone else, and watching someone who had barely lifted a finger get handed the title I had earned? And then, as if to add insult to injury, Zach turned to me again, his smile still wide. "Carla has been an invaluable part of this process," he said, his voice practically oozing with false gratitude. "We're all lucky to have her on our team." I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout that none of this was his work. That it was my designs, my calculations, my leadership behind the scenes. But I stayed silent, my teeth clenched so tightly I thought I might snap them. As the applause continued, I barely heard Elaine's voice, barely noticed her furious stare from across the room. She was angry. I could see that in her eyes. But she didn't say anything. None of the senior engineers said anything. No one questioned it. The room buzzed with excitement, congratulating Zach as he made his way to the front. Everyone was in awe of him. Everyone except me. I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out of that room and never look back. But I stayed, sitting there in silence, forcing a smile as I clapped along with everyone else. But deep down I knew something that none of them did. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to let Zach walk away with my title, my recognition, and pretend like he had done all the work. That night, as I walked home through the streets of the city, my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first, but it buzzed again and again. It was Elaine. "Carla, call me when you get this," her message read. "We need to talk." I was about to get up from my desk when I realized something. Something that, up until this point, I hadn't let myself fully process. It was time to make things right. I wasn't going to let Zach take what was mine. Not without a fight. The days following Zach's promotion were a blur of forced smiles and clenched fists. I kept my head down, focusing on the work, trying to make sense of the growing resentment that festered inside me. But every time I looked up from my desk, every time I saw Zach walking through the office with that confident swagger, I felt my stomach churn. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve any of it. But it didn't matter what I felt, did it? Because in the end it was always going to be Zach's face that they saw in meetings, his name they called when things went well. And mine? Mine would remain buried behind the scenes, just like it had always been. I was just the silent worker bee, invisible and unnoticed until someone needed a favor. And that's exactly what he started doing. Asking for favors. It began subtly at first. Zach would swing by my desk under the guise of casual conversation. All charming grins and confident posture. He'd lean against my cubicle, making small talk about a new project or a design flaw that needed fixing. "I'm a little swamped with some of the executive meetings," he'd say. "Can you check the calculations for the West Side Bridge design? I just want to be sure we're hitting the right margins. Just a quick look over before I present." I'd nod, trying not to sound bitter, and set aside my own work to go over the numbers. It didn't take long to realize that the quick look over was his way of dumping his responsibility onto me. He'd present my work as his, giving me the smallest acknowledgement possible. "Shout out to Carla for the quick fix," he'd say. But even that felt like a backhanded compliment, something he threw out to avoid complete silence when the room acknowledged his brilliant ideas. And the worst part? No one else seemed to notice. I was the one in the trenches, fixing the details while Zach got the glory. At first, I told myself I was helping. That's just how things worked in a big office, right? There were always the ones who did the heavy lifting and the ones who got the credit. But the more I worked, the more I realized something. Zach wasn't just asking for help. He was taking advantage of it. One afternoon, I was sitting in the conference room with a few other engineers, reviewing the final draft for a city development project. It was a major undertaking, and it was one of the few moments where I felt like my work truly shone. The plans were mine. The numbers, the designs, the proposals, they were all my effort. Zach sat beside me, reviewing the packet I had meticulously prepared. I watched him glance over the first few pages, his eyes scanning the details without really reading them. Then in front of the group he began speaking. "We'll need to make some changes here," he said, pointing at one of the blueprints. "This structural element is too weak for the budget they're giving us. We'll need to rework the calculations and get this back to the client by Thursday." The entire room nodded along, none the wiser to the fact that this was my design, my calculations. And while Zach was presenting it as if he had made the adjustments, the truth was he hadn't done any of the work at all. I held my tongue. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, but I didn't say anything. I just sat there, listening as Zach outlined how the team would handle his changes. It was clear, to me, at least, that he was taking credit for everything. And what was I doing? I was sitting there, quietly seething, doing nothing but letting it happen. But that was the moment I realized something else. This wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about control. Zach was systematically using me to build his reputation, while taking every opportunity to minimize my role in every project. And I let it happen. I let it slide. But not anymore. I started documenting everything. Emails, document versions, timestamps. I kept track of every single time I fixed his mistakes, every time I did the work, and every time he presented it as his own. I didn't know exactly how I was going to use it, but I knew I needed a record. I needed proof of the abuse. It didn't take long for Zach to escalate his tactics. He began delegating entire projects to me under the guise of collaboration. He'd ask me to handle the design work and the calculations, and then in meetings he'd walk in cool and collected, and present it like it was all his. "You've done great work on this," he'd say, his voice dripping with false praise. "This is why we're going to hit our deadline with flying colors. Carla really knocked it out of the park on this one." His words barely registered. What bothered me wasn't that he was lying to the team. It was that he was lying to himself. He was taking everything from me. And I was letting him. The hardest part? The worst part? The people who knew about it, the ones who saw it happening, were staying silent. Elaine, for all her anger, never said a word. And when I tried to talk to her about it, she only looked at me with that same look of frustration that I couldn't quite place. She knew. She had to know what was happening. But she didn't intervene. The whispers from my colleagues started. The few people I considered friends began sending me sympathetic looks. "We know what's going on, Carla," they'd say in hushed tones. "You're doing all the work, but they're treating you like a shadow. Just wait. They'll see." But waiting wasn't enough anymore. I wasn't going to sit back and watch as Zach climbed the corporate ladder on the backs of my hard work. It wasn't just about the recognition anymore. It was about respect. It was about making sure that, at the end of the day, people knew who had done the work. And that night, as I stayed late to finalize another set of plans for a new development, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go on any longer. I had to start taking action. It was time to make the world see me. To make sure they knew exactly who had been doing the heavy lifting all along. And Zach. He wasn't going to know what hit him. The City Bridge project had been months in the making. It was big. It was ambitious. And it was supposed to be the one that put Verticore Designs on the map in a new way. The kind of project that had your name attached to it for years. The kind that marked the difference between good and great in the world of structural engineering. And it was my project. It was the one thing I had believed, deep down, would finally set me apart. But as always, Zach had found his way in. And by the time the final presentation came around, I was standing there, holding my breath, ready to hand over something that felt like a lifeline, my designs, my plans, my late-night hours, to a team that still didn't quite understand the depth of the work behind it. They wouldn't see the sleepless nights or the sacrifices. They would only see Zach's smug smile. I spent the night before the presentation working well past midnight, making sure every detail was in place. Every number, every calculation had to be perfect. Zach had stopped asking for my help a few weeks ago. At least, not directly. But I still saw his presence in every meeting, every email. He was everywhere. And yet, when I walked into the meeting room the next morning, There he was, standing at the front, casually adjusting his tie, as though he owned the place. He was already set to present the designs to the city's contractors, and I was once again reduced to the background. All right, let's get started, Zach said, standing tall at the front of the room, his voice carrying across the table. He turned to me with that same, annoying, almost affectionate grin. Carla, why don't you get us started? You've been all over the calculations for this, right? I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks as I stood up, my mind blanking for just a second. I had been doing all of the work, but somehow, I had become just a minor player in my own project. Sure, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat as I walked to the projector and started presenting the plans. I went through the numbers, showing exactly how the design would support the weight distribution, how the materials were chosen to meet the load-bearing requirements, and how the project was going to be completed on time and under budget. Zach didn't even glance at the screen as I spoke. Instead, he made small talk with one of the contractors across the table, smiling, laughing, as if this was all just another social event for him. He was so good at pretending he knew it all. So good at talking circles around everyone with his charisma and false humility. I wanted to scream. When I finished, I stood back, letting him take the stage. Zach confidently stepped forward, moving to the front and taking control of the presentation. He talked about his vision for the bridge, how he wanted it to symbolize the city's growth, making grand statements about its importance, its significance. He didn't even mention the work I'd done, the design I'd spent weeks perfecting. Zach spoke with so much certainty, so much conviction, that no one in the room even noticed the gap between what he was saying and the actual work that had been done. They were too busy nodding and praising him. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about the project anymore. It was about something else. Zach wasn't just taking credit for my work. He was systematically erasing me. My contributions, my knowledge, my expertise, all of it was being buried under layers of charm and fake humility. When the meeting ended, and the contractors gave their initial approval, I was walking out of the room, my stomach in knots, when I overheard Darren Holt talking to Zach. He was praising him for the smooth presentation, for his leadership, for how he had guided the team through the process. You've really done a lot of heavy lifting on this one, Darren said with a laugh. I'm impressed. The city's going to love this. It's good to see someone with your charisma leading the charge. The words hit me like a slap. Charisma? Charisma. I could feel my breath quickening. My hands were trembling. I had done everything for this project, but no one seemed to care about the work behind the presentation. No one cared about the sacrifices, the late nights. All they saw was Zach's polished smile and his ability to win people over. He had nothing to show for this project, but here he was, walking away with all the praise. And here I was, invisible. Again. That evening, when I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the city lights through my apartment window. I had been on the edge for weeks, but today, everything felt like it had collapsed. I thought about the design documents, the plans, the work I had put in. I thought about Zach, standing at the front of the room, taking my work and making it his own. And in that moment, I realized something. He wasn't just taking credit for my work. He was using me. And I was letting him. I'd had enough. The next day, I took my first real step toward fighting back. I made an appointment with the company's ethics committee. I started pulling together the emails, the drafts, the revisions. Everything that proved I had been the one doing the heavy lifting. But I also did something else. I reached out to Jenna, a legal consultant I had met through an industry event. She was smart, no nonsense, and more than willing to give me advice on what my next step should be. I wasn't just going to expose Zach for the fraud he was. I was going to make sure the entire company saw the truth. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I was going to make sure they knew exactly who had done the work. The next time they looked at the project, I wanted them to know it was my work, my vision, my effort. Zach wouldn't get away with this any longer. It was time to show them who had really been doing the work behind the scenes. It was time for Zach to realize that I wasn't going to be his puppet any longer. And for the first time in months, I felt the tiniest spark of hope. I woke up the next morning with a strange clarity in my mind. The kind that only comes after you've made the decision to stop being passive. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking back control of my life. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for so long, the feeling of being invisible, of being used, had started to lift. I had no illusions anymore. This wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready to make the company, and Zach, understand that I wasn't going to play their game anymore. After that meeting with the ethics committee, I knew the ball was rolling. I'd already spoken to Jenna, and she'd advised me to start documenting everything: emails, messages, design files, timestamps. Anything that proved my involvement in the projects Zach had been presenting as his own. It felt like I was slowly turning into a detective in my own life, piecing together evidence I could eventually use to expose the truth. I had spent hours that night combing through email threads, carefully organizing files that proved my contributions. I thought about every moment when I'd been asked to cover for Zach, every instance where I'd quietly done the work, not expecting anything in return. The more I found, the angrier I became. But I couldn't just sit on this. I had to take action. I knew I couldn't go directly to Darren Holt just yet. He wasn't going to listen without some serious proof, and I wasn't sure how much he would actually care. But the ethics committee? They had to listen. They would have to. The following morning, I walked into work with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. I had a folder under my arm, filled with the evidence I'd gathered. It was a strange feeling, part relief, part fear. I had been preparing for this moment for so long, but now that it was finally here, the nerves started to set in. I met Jenna for coffee before heading to the office. She was sitting at a small table in the corner, her laptop open in front of her. When she saw me walk in, she waved me over. "You ready for this?" she asked, her eyes sharp but not unkind. I sat down, setting my own folder in front of me. "I think so. I'm nervous, but I know what I'm doing is the right thing." Jenna nodded, leaning in. "You've got this. Just stay calm, stay factual. The committee's job is to investigate what's going on. All you're doing is giving them the tools to see the truth." I nodded, taking a deep breath. The weight of it all was still heavy, but there was also a flicker of excitement inside me. For the first time in months, I wasn't just waiting for something to happen. I was making it happen. At the office, I walked into the ethics committee's meeting room with my head held high. The committee members, 3 senior executives including Elaine, were already sitting at the table, waiting for me. I could feel my palms sweat as I sat down, but I forced myself to keep my posture relaxed, calm. Elaine gave me a sympathetic glance, but she didn't say anything. The others, 2 men I barely knew, studied me silently, their faces unreadable. I opened the folder, sliding the first set of documents across the table. I've gathered evidence of several instances where my work was taken and presented as someone else's. Specifically Zach Ellison's. I began, my voice steady but firm. "I've been contributing significantly to major projects, but he's been taking the credit." The silence that followed was thick. I couldn't tell if the committee was shocked, or if they were just trying to process everything. Elaine shifted in her seat. "Carla, we all know that you're a valuable part of the team. But are you sure that Zach is taking credit for your work? This is a serious accusation." I wasn't surprised that Elaine was trying to soften the blow. She was trying to protect me, but also trying to give Zach the benefit of the doubt. She had always been that way, balancing the line between being a mentor to me and being loyal to the company. But I wasn't backing down now. "Absolutely," I said, opening the next set of documents. "Here are the emails and revisions for the West Side Bridge project. If you look closely at the timestamps, you'll see that I sent him the final design plans, which he then presented at meetings. He didn't mention that I did the work. He barely acknowledged my contributions. He just called it our design and used my calculations as his own." I slid another sheet forward. "And here are the meeting minutes from our last staff briefing. He's publicly taking credit for my ideas, even going so far as to make it seem like he led the entire project when, in fact, I was the one doing the heavy lifting." The committee members flipped through the papers, and I watched as they absorbed the evidence. Elaine looked at me with a serious expression now, her voice quieter. "This is a lot of material, Carla. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I took a deep breath. This was it. I had been holding back for so long, but I was done hiding. "Yes, I'm sure. I've had enough of being treated like I'm invisible. I've done the work, I've put in the time, and I've earned that promotion. Zach has been undermining me, and I can't let this go on anymore. The other two executives glanced at each other, exchanging silent looks. One of them, a man I didn't recognize, raised an eyebrow. And what do you want us to do about this? I had expected this question. I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for fairness. I want the work to be acknowledged, and I want the team to know who is really doing the work. If Zach has been taking credit for it, then I want him to answer for it. He needs to be held accountable for his actions. The room was silent for a long while, and I felt my pulse quicken. Had I gone too far? Would they back me up? Finally, Elaine broke the silence. We'll look into this, Carla. We can't promise anything right now, but we'll investigate. I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. Thank you, I said, rising from my seat. That's all I'm asking for, a fair investigation. As I walked out of the room, I felt a wave of exhaustion roll over me, but I also felt something else, something that had been missing for a long time. Hope. I had taken control. I had exposed the truth, and now it was in their hands. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew this. I was done being invisible. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind was racing with everything that had happened. I'd made the decision to expose Zach's manipulation, to take control of my career. But even with the ethics committee taking my side, part of me still feared the consequences. I wasn't just challenging Zach anymore. I was challenging the entire system that had allowed him to thrive by riding on my coattails. By morning, the buzz in the office was palpable. I could feel the tension in the air as I walked through the doors, the murmurs following me down the hallway. Everyone knew. The rumors had already spread. Even if the official investigation hadn't started yet, people were talking. They were whispering about what I had done, about Zach's alleged behavior, about my role in it all. But as I walked past Zach's office, I caught sight of him. He was standing by his desk, looking out the window. He had no idea what was coming. He didn't know I had already set everything in motion. It felt good, but it also felt terrifying. This was the moment I had been building up to for months. It had gone beyond getting recognition for my work. It was about taking a stand for myself and making sure that I was never overlooked again. I made my way to the HR department. I had drafted the resignation letter the night before, and now it was time to deliver it. There was no more sitting on the sidelines, no more waiting for someone else to fix things. I was done. Darren Holt's secretary glanced up at me as I entered. Carla, she said, her voice tinged with concern. Darren's in a meeting right now. Is everything okay? I nodded. I need to see him privately. I'm resigning. Her eyes widened, but she quickly nodded and stood. I'll let him know. Please take a seat. I sat down in the waiting area, my palms sweating as I clutched the resignation letter in my hands. It was official now. There was no going back. I was walking away from everything, from Verticore, from the years of hard work I had put in. But I had made my peace with it. No job, no amount of money, was worth sacrificing my dignity. And I wasn't going to work for a company that valued charm over competence. The door opened a few minutes later, and Darren stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. He gestured for me to stand. Carla, he said, his voice warm but tired. What's going on? I thought we were all set for the West Side Bridge project. We've been seeing some excellent results from you. What's this about? I stood, taking a deep breath before I handed him the letter. His eyes flicked down to it, and he quickly scanned the first few lines. The color drained from his face as he looked back at me, his confusion giving way to something else. You're resigning? He asked, his voice flat. I nodded. I can't work here anymore, Darren. Not under these conditions. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he folded the letter in half. Carla, I know things haven't been easy lately, but this is sudden. What's really going on? Is it about the promotion? I know Zach getting it was a tough pill to swallow, but it's not just about the promotion. I cut him off. It's about the way things work here. It's about how people like Zach can take credit for work they didn't do and get rewarded for it. It's about being invisible while doing all the work. I can't be part of a system that lets that happen. Darren opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance to speak. I've already spoken with the ethics committee. I continued, my voice calm but firm. They'll be investigating Zach's behavior. But this is my resignation. I'm done, Darren. He blinked, still processing the words. Then, after a long pause, he finally spoke. I understand you're upset. But Carla, I think you're making a mistake. We could work this out. I'll talk to Zach. I'll talk to the board. We can fix this. I shook my head. No. I've already made up my mind. You can't fix this. Zach's been undermining me for months and I've had enough. Darren's expression hardened. You're sure about this? I am, I said, my voice unwavering. And I'm sending a copy of this letter to the ethics board. Darren let out a frustrated breath, running a hand through his hair. This is going to cause a lot of problems for you, Carla. You're burning bridges here. I looked him in the eye. I've already burned them, Darren. I just don't care anymore. He stood there for a moment, staring at me as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. You're making a huge mistake, he repeated, but there was no more conviction in his voice. It was like he was trying to convince himself. Goodbye, Darren, I said, turning to leave. As I walked out of the room, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had made my choice. I wasn't going to wait around for people who didn't value me. I wasn't going to let Zach win. Not anymore. I didn't even flinch as I passed the reception desk, didn't look back when I saw a few people whispering behind me. I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was leaving on my own terms. And as I stepped outside into the bright sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, freedom. The phone buzzed in my pocket as I reached my car, and I pulled it out to check the message. It was from Elaine. The board has launched an inquiry. You did the right thing, Carla. I'm proud of you. I smiled. It was a small victory, but it was enough to keep me going. Now it was time to figure out what came next. And I wasn't going to stop until I found it. The first few weeks after I left Verticore were difficult, to say the least. I wasn't just grieving a job, I was grieving the idea of what I thought my life was going to look like. I had dedicated the past 5 years to that company, sacrificing my evenings, weekends, and sometimes even my mental health. To walk away from that, to take control of my future, was both terrifying and exhilarating. There were days when I felt the weight of my decision. The first time I logged into LinkedIn after leaving the company, I saw the congratulatory posts from my former colleagues, their kind words about Zach's promotion, their support for him as the new leader. The more I scrolled, the more I felt like I was stepping away from everything I had worked so hard for. It wasn't just the job, it was the identity I had built around it. But then there were days when the weight lifted. The days when I woke up and didn't feel the heavy pressure of the corporate grind pushing me into a chair at my desk. The days when I could go for a walk without a deadline hanging over my head, when I could pick up a book and actually read it from cover to cover without thinking about an email I hadn't sent or a meeting I'd missed. One of those days, as I was sitting at my small kitchen table sipping coffee, I got a call. It was from Jenna, the legal consultant I had reached out to during my final days at Verticore. I had kept her in the loop about everything, the ethics committee, my resignation, Zach's betrayal. Carla, she said when I answered, I've got good news. The board's investigation into Zach is moving forward. They've gathered enough evidence, and the company is taking action. I felt a knot loosen in my chest. What does that mean? Is he going to be held accountable? I can't say too much yet, Jenna said. But the fact that the investigation is happening means they're taking this seriously. Word is, Zach's not going to walk away from this without consequences. The ethics board is already drafting an official report, and it's going to affect his standing at the company. They're even looking at some other departments, and from what I hear, they're considering making some internal changes. My stomach flipped, a strange mixture of satisfaction and relief flooding me. It wasn't over yet. But the idea that Zach would finally face the repercussions of his actions was everything I had been hoping for. Thank you, Jenna, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I couldn't have done this without you. Without knowing I had someone who understood the legal side of things. You've got the right to stand up for yourself, Carla, Jenna replied. You did the right thing. You're not alone in this. I smiled as I hung up. The weight that had been dragging me down for so long finally beginning to lift. The decision to leave Verticore was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But in that moment, I knew I'd made the right choice. A few days later, I found myself at an industry gala, an event I would have never even considered attending while I was working at Verticore. But now, as an independent engineer, I was attending as a guest, not a bystander. I didn't have to sit at the back of the room or hide behind the accomplishments of others. This was my chance to be seen for who I really was. I dressed carefully that night, choosing a sleek black dress that made me feel confident. When I arrived at the venue, I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach. The room was full of professionals, many of whom I had worked with over the years, and many more I had admired from afar. It was intimidating, to say the least. But when I walked in, something shifted inside me. I wasn't the person I had been at Verticore, trying to blend in, trying to be invisible. No, tonight I was different. I wasn't looking to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to prove myself anymore. I was walking in my own skin, proud of what I had accomplished and even prouder of the woman I was becoming. As I made my way through the crowd, I was stopped by a familiar face, one of the contractors I had worked with on the West Side Bridge project. His name was Tom. He had been one of the few people who had genuinely respected my work at Verticore. "Carla," he exclaimed when he saw me. "I didn't know you were going to be here. It's been too long." "Tom," I said, smiling. "It's good to see you. It's been a while." He looked at me curiously, his eyes scanning my face. "I heard about what happened with the promotion," he said, leaning in slightly. "People were talking. I just want to say, you did the right thing. Zach might be charming, but he doesn't have half the skills you do." I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at the corner of my lips. "Thank you," I said softly. "It's been a long road." Tom glanced around the room, lowering his voice. "I've got some clients who could use someone with your expertise. If you're open to it, we should talk about some freelance work. I've seen firsthand how good you are, Carla. We could use someone like you." The offer caught me off guard. "I'm definitely open to it," I said, a spark of excitement lighting up my chest. "Let's talk soon." And just like that, a door I never expected to open cracked open before me. The night continued with laughter and conversation. And before long, I found myself surrounded by professionals who saw me for what I was. Capable, intelligent, and independent. I wasn't just the woman behind the scenes anymore. I was the one making the decisions, the one with the expertise to back it up. And the best part? I was doing it on my own terms. As the night drew to a close, I stood outside the venue, breathing in the cool night air. I felt a sense of accomplishment that was different from anything I'd ever felt before. I was finally free from the expectations of others, free from the corporate grind, and free from the man who had tried to take credit for my work. And as I looked out at the city skyline, I knew that this was just the beginning. I had built something for myself, and it was only going to grow. The future was wide open, and for the first time, I was in control. A year had passed since I left Verticore, and life had unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted. Starting my own consulting business had been a challenge, but it had also been one of the best decisions I'd ever made. I'd been able to choose the projects I wanted, build my own team, and most importantly, work for people who valued my contributions rather than exploiting them. I looked around my small but bustling office. The walls were lined with engineering blueprints, and the desk cluttered with contracts, project proposals, and thank you notes from clients who had been thrilled with my work. My business was growing, slowly but surely, with 5 full-time employees and a handful of freelancers who I called on when I needed extra help. There were days when it felt overwhelming, days when the weight of running a business threatened to crush me. But then I'd look at the projects we were working on, the designs we were creating, and I knew it was all worth it. I'd spent so many years working for others, burying my skills beneath layers of bureaucracy and favoritism. But now, I was finally in control. I was finally doing things my way. I leaned back in my chair, taking a sip of coffee as I watched my team work. Mia, my lead engineer, was on a call with a contractor, discussing the final specifications for a bridge redesign. James, my project manager, was reviewing the timeline for our next project, a high-rise that would soon be the centerpiece of the city's skyline. I couldn't help but smile. The team I had built was strong, and the pride I felt in each of them was something I never expected when I first struck out on my own. But it wasn't just about the projects anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about the culture I was building, one where everyone's contributions were valued, where talent didn't go unnoticed, and where the work spoke for itself. As I sat there, feeling content with the direction my business was heading, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Thomas, the contractor I had met at the gala. I hadn't heard from him in months, so I quickly opened it. Carla, hope all is well. Just wanted to reach out and let you know that Verticore's CEO, Darren Holt, has been trying to contact you. He says they want to offer you a position as lead project engineer. They're offering a huge salary, board access, and all the perks. I know things ended badly, but it sounds like they've cleaned up their act. Thought you might want to know. I stared at the message for a long moment, letting it sink in. Verticore? Offering me a job? After everything that had happened? After I had walked away from all their false promises, their favoritism, and their manipulation? I shook my head, laughing under my breath. It was almost too ridiculous to entertain. But deep down, I knew exactly what I would do. I closed my eyes for a moment, thinking about how far I had come. I thought about the long hours spent on projects that never recognized my effort. I thought about how I had let my talent be buried under someone else's name for too long. But that was over. I had built something of my own, something that was mine. I picked up my phone and typed out a response to Thomas. Thanks for the heads up, Thomas. But I'm not interested. I've got something better now. I'm building something that values real contribution. And I'm not going back to the system that held me down. I hit send and set my phone down, feeling a wave of satisfaction wash over me. I wasn't just walking away from Verticore's offer. I was walking away from the entire system that had made me feel small, invisible, and unappreciated. They could try to offer me money, status, and titles, but I had something far more valuable now. Independence. As the day went on, I got back to work, answering emails, reviewing contracts, and brainstorming the next big project with my team. There was always something new to tackle, always a new challenge to face. But this time it wasn't about proving myself to anyone else. It was about proving to myself that I had the strength to build a future on my own terms. Later that week, I attended a conference for women in engineering. I had been invited to speak on a panel about leadership and ethics in the industry. It was surreal, sitting on that stage with other women who had worked their way up in a field that wasn't always welcoming, sharing stories of struggle and success. When it was my turn to speak, I told them my story, the story of how I had worked hard, only to be overlooked, how I had been taken advantage of, and how, in the end, I had decided to build something that would never take my hard work for granted again. The audience responded with applause, but it wasn't the applause that meant the most to me. It was the messages I received afterward, the emails and texts from young engineers who were inspired by my journey. One message in particular stood out. Because of you, I finally realized I don't have to hide my worth. I'm not going to let anyone take credit for my work again. Thank you for showing me it's possible to succeed on my own terms. In that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just building a business. I was building a legacy that would show others, especially young women in engineering, that they could fight for what was theirs, that they could demand respect, and that they could build their own futures, no matter how many times the world tried to push them down. A year ago, I had been at rock bottom, betrayed and defeated. But now, here I was, a leader, a mentor, a woman who had taken control of her destiny and helped others do the same. As I closed my laptop that night, I thought about how far I had come. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just see the work ahead of me. I saw the impact I was making. And that, more than anything, was the real reward. My legacy had only just begun.